Hello, my name is Mark Thomas Patterson. I am from the greater St. Louis area, and I am interested in studying 20th century international history with a focus on modern Europe.
Okay, my name is Shinong, and I'm from Australia, though I did do my undergrad in the US, and I study Chinese history.
My name is David Marthy. I'm from upstate New York, and I study American history, 20th century, with a focus on war and remembrance.
My name is Sebastian Quiñones. I'm from Puerto Rico. I am studying Latin American history, but kind of also in between early American and military history.
My name is Luca Zuma. I study LGBTQ conservatives and evangelicals in the US, but I guess broadly the history of ideas and US history.
Before I applied to graduate school, I initially wanted to become a diplomat in the State Department, and I entered in Congress, and I was very interested in going the policy route, and I was very interested in US relations with Eastern Europe, with the former Soviet Union, with Russia, and I realized that I was interested in these questions of how did things come to be. So I worked as a research assistant for a political scientist for a bit, and that was actually an incredibly insightful experience because she and I would talk, and I was looking at African rebel groups during the 1990s and basically coding how these groups formed. And I was like, oh, I really like writing the history of these groups and the stories of how they formed. And when we were talking, she was like, Mark, that's more of a historical thing. As a political scientist, these are the questions I'm interested in.
In high school, I had an absolutely wonderful Latin teacher. Her name is Karen Moon. And she was the reason why I originally wanted to study classics. But then when I got to college, I had the most amazing mentor at UCLA. Her name is Andrea Goldman. And I think under kind of her mentorship, I figured out which were the questions I was most interested in. Those questions were in China's history. So.
I knew I wanted to be a historian when I graduated from Marist College, my undergrad institution. I got an undergrad in history, a bachelor's in history there, and then I went into the Army. I knew there was a program in the Army where I could go to grad school after 5 or 6 years, and I endeavored to do that program as a young officer. So it was probably coming out of my undergrad institution when I knew that I wanted to go back eventually and continue learning.
I've always been interested in history since I was very young. It was always my favorite topic. I was always pretty good at it. Family stories too. I was always going after trying to have the older people in my parents, my grandparents, my great grandfather, just telling me stories, and I was just always interested in that concept of family history, stories.
I went to a really small liberal arts college. There were 3 professors in the history department, and it was like a history and political thought was the name of the major. So I kind of got political theory and political science along with history, and seeing those intersections really interested me.
What I most enjoy about studying history is, I think, those moments when I'm looking at a source or even reading a textbook or something, and I have those glimpses of, wow, these are things that people in the past lived through, and now we're here to tell the tale, essentially. We've built our lives that we have today around the legacy of what people lived through in the past. I think my favorite thing is just thinking about that and thinking about what I could possibly contribute to the conversation.
That I just feel it's interesting once you go through these sources. And first of all, it just tells you different things, right? May contradict what you've been taught. And it's interesting trying to get into the mindset of people 500, 600 years ago, because it's just a completely different world, and it's try to understand what was going through their minds as much as such a thing as possible. But I enjoy that about history, just going through and trying to do the best I can just to see how things were.
I guess what I enjoy about studying history to this day is listening to people's stories. I really want to do more oral history, and I could just listen almost all day to people telling me about their lives and their experiences. It's the most interesting thing in the world to me.
I decided to come to the University of North Carolina in large part because of my advisors. I had read their work before I applied, and I thought both of my advisors, or the advisors I applied into, who were Michael Morgan and Klaus Lares, were doing really interesting scholarship looking at 20th century international history and European history. And this is just something that's not too common, to have two people who are both interested in similar fields. And I'd also met with graduate students in the program before I applied, and they were telling me about how awesome it was, and I was like, and then once we had the admitted student weekend, I realized this is what I want to do. This seems absolutely amazing, and I'm gonna have a really good time here. And so far, it's been an absolutely great experience.
I came to UNC through a program in the Army that funds students to achieve a degree and then move on to teach at one of the service academies. So after this, I will teach at West Point in the history department as an American history instructor. But more broadly, I applied to many schools, and UNC was one of a few, thankfully, that accepted me. And I chose UNC because I respected their advisors and the work that they've done in their fields more than any of the other advisors who I could have been able to work with. North Carolina is an incredible place to live, as I'm learning after being here for only two months. And the community around Chapel Hill, Carrboro, Durham, Raleigh, it's a very welcoming community and a very family-friendly community as well.
I think history and historians are important because the way that we got to where we are today, this isn't the way that things have always been done or the way that people everywhere do things. And I think understanding that helps us be more thoughtful about what we want to see from the future. Understanding history, both in terms of just what was different about the past and also particularly what led to us being where we are now, I think helps us be more reflective about the world around us, and helps us be more conscious in what we want to do and we want to see in the future.
I think history and historians are important in part, to uncover the past and also different narratives about the past. But also, again, because I think that there are real implications for the present that aren't just about nuance or about, really cliche, not repeating mistakes. I think it also informs our identities and maybe interactions with each other as well.
So if you're somebody who's interested in seeking a graduate degree in history, a couple pieces of advice I have is absolutely apply to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Make contact with a professor whom you want to be your advisor. This is extremely important. Present a coherent plan to them about what you want to research and roughly what you think some of the ways you can research it are. And then come with a lot of questions, because that's the whole point. Don't have answers to what you want to do, because if you have answers to what you want to do, don't be a historian. Don't seek a graduate degree. I'm sure that you probably just have questions. And then the most important thing, which everyone will tell you, is choose to study something that you're passionate about, because as I understand my future and what it will be, if I'm not passionate about the thousands and tens of thousands of pages that I'm going to have to lay my eyes upon over the next 5 to 7, really the rest of my life, then I'm not going to be able to do it. So you need to identify the topic which is right for you and present a coherent plan about how you're going to research that topic.
My advice for students who are interested in pursuing graduate studies in history is something that you may be thinking about is the value of studying history or social sciences or humanity as a whole, because that's something that has come out a lot, especially with, talk about student loans and the worth of, higher education. And I think my advice, the way that I thought about it, was just like any other job. This is something that I think is worth my time, I think is worth doing, and if you feel that way, then don't feel pressured into thinking otherwise by what people might tell you.